Hey, it's Ted Bradley here, and in this video, let's chat for a couple moments about success in quitting smoking. Though first, a little bit of a story. A friend of mine did recently pass away a couple of years ago, though he was in his early 90s, so he did quite well. And what's interesting about him is that he's been doing hypnosis, or was doing hypnosis, even dating back to the 1950s, the 1960s. And to quote his words, he was doing hypnosis to help people quit smoking before it was even a thing to quit smoking. You know, think back. At one point in time, there were actually advertisements of doctors recommending this brand over another brand. And then perhaps as public health became more of a public concern, and then as perhaps research was then being put out there about the adverse effects of cigarette smoking, it's about that time that this whole concept of really, in his words, a business of helping people quit smoking really developed. And if you look at some of the research out there, I mean, do the research on your own. The techniques out there of nicotine replacement therapies, whether it's the patch, the gum, the mints, or other variations, you'll find research out there that points to upwards of 25 to 30% of people will be successful using that methodology. It's a relatively low number. That's saying upwards of 3 out of 4 or 7 out of 10, based on the research, will fail using those techniques. And I say that not to completely make fun or poke or give those other methods a hard time. I say that to simply point out, if it really were the nicotine, perhaps that would work every single time, but it's not. That's why there's 3 aspects of helping you quit smoking in this process. First of all, there's the physical component. If you date things back in history of hypnosis, you will find people who were using hypnotism as the sole form of anesthesia in medical procedures. They were doing major surgeries. They were amputating with any sort of anesthesia, which you and I could look at and say, that's crazy. Yet then again, this is a time where modern chemical anesthesia was not yet around. Now that's not to say that we have to cut you open to be effective. No. That is to say the same techniques they were using in that application are the same techniques that you and I could use together to work on the cravings, urges, physical withdrawal, the physical component of the process. The second phase of things is all about the mental change, that mental process, working towards building those better behaviors. That's not so much about what you're going to be doing anymore, it's more so about how you're going to be living your life. So what's interesting is I kind of keep tabs about what are the reasons that people come into this process. And one of the most common reasons, aside from health of course being very important, is that you're spending all this time around a behavior that you don't want to have there at all anymore. You're spending all this time planning and strategizing over a habit that you don't want to be doing anymore. Or just to simply move on. I love the phrase, it's just one less thing I have to deal with. So again, the mental shift, where that pack of cigarettes is just no longer congruent to who you've become, out of sight, out of mind. The third component is going to sound a little magical, but it kind of comes down to how I address personal change working with my clients here. And it's working towards that mindset as if you never smoked before in your life. So not even so much this kind of game of something that I've quit or something that I no longer feel I need to do. Yet instead working towards that mindset where it's just a thing. You know, how do you live your life? The story behind this is kind of interesting. A woman's in my office a couple of years ago. We're having a nice conversation and suddenly she points her finger at me and she goes, "But you've never smoked before, so you don't know what I'm going through." Which at that point, we could label that as what we would often call learned helplessness. That as long as she's holding on to that helpless identity, she's going to stay in the problem. Yet I took it as an opportunity to see her where she was and help her to get where she was clearly wanting to be. You know what? you're right, I've never smoked before. And here in this office, there's a jar of a couple of $100 worth of cigarettes that people have thrown out over the last couple of months. And you know what's fun? I sit in this office 30 to 40 hours a week, and I've never thought about going over and lighting one of those up. Doesn't that sound nice? At which point her whole tone shifted, and she goes, yeah, that does sound nice. So how do you live your life as that person who has never had to deal with them in the first place? Rather than this recovery or recovering mental aspect of, oh, if I just had one, I'm going to be sucked back into that old way. Instead, just simply move on with your life as if it wasn't even a thing that was part of your life in the first place. So I mentioned these three things. Now, in terms of a guarantee, I put a lot of emphasis also on you. I'm going to put some techniques into your hands and interesting aspects of hypnosis. So rather than I need to go home and to listen to this 1 hour program every single night, otherwise this won't work. No, we don't do that here. Instead, we're going to teach you self-hypnosis techniques you can do anytime, anywhere, and nobody knows you're doing something. So even if there is the thought, even if there is just a hint of a craving, you're going to leave this process armed and ready with mental processes, self-hypnosis techniques you can do anytime, anywhere, and nobody knows you're doing something. So that even if you're in a public environment, you've got something you can put into place right away and be that success without having to revert back to the cigarettes. I'm comfortable saying this. Those people who follow through with the entire program, as I recommend, those people who make use of the techniques that I share with them, and those people that show up ready to throw those cigarettes out and move on with your life, that's the group of people that leave this process extremely happy. And indeed, if you look at the research that's out there on the efficacy of hypnosis for quitting smoking, you will see numbers out there often as high as 90 to 93% success. Numbers that you're just simply not going to see with the nicotine replacement therapies. Everything begins with you. I look forward to meeting you soon.